So hello friends, this is Adrian back with you with the second of 5 video blogs attempting to tell the story of Alpha and Omega. The thinking and then the writing, recording, the premiere in Jerusalem in 1986, and now more than 30 years later this brand new recording, revisiting that work, trying to tell its story again but in a language that fits 2017 and 2018. Where I got to at the end of the last video was my little tour in Germany of British Army bases. And the base I was in, this is in 1985, was near a German village called Bergen. Because I hadn't seen another village in the area with the name of Belsen, I hadn't put 2 and 2 together, and it had not occurred to me that we were indeed pretty much on the site of the former concentration camp Bergen-Belsen. What I did know was that there was a profoundly oppressive atmosphere around this place, particularly the army base. It was unpleasant, and it was like those of you who know what I mean by a spiritual oppression. There was a sense in which something was wrong. Something was wrong, whether right now or whether historically. There felt to be a deep unease about this place. I was later to find out that, as it happens, this British Army base had been the SS headquarters managing Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. No wonder that I felt that oppressive atmosphere really around the whole of my time there. After the concert, I went to sleep. I awoke the following morning, believe it or not, to the sounds of warfare. This is not an exaggeration, and I wasn't fantasizing. I heard explosions, I heard rifle fire, and I heard the thud of, unmistakably, bombs. In fact, more than that, I actually felt the vibration of the ground. I got out of bed rather concerned. I was staying with the chaplain, and I just said to him, what on the heck's going on? Some kind of a war broken out in this region. And he just looked at me and said, oh no, there's a NATO war exercise going on in the region, and it'll be going on for most of the morning. So I understood, of course, the reason for that, but I sensed that there was more to it in terms of my own understanding of what was going on for me personally, spiritually, but also the next part of my own faith journey. And I asked the chaplain before we left for Hamburg, could he take me to Bergen-Belsen? I knew by that stage that I needed to visit. We drove there and we stepped into Bergen-Belsen, which, those of you who've been there, is a huge expanse. It's mainly a field with stones in different places, inscribed with the number of Jewish people, men, women and children that were found there, with various very powerful, very emotive words, particularly from the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, a lot of reference to the Psalms, and they spoke of the suffering, of the pain, of that sense of God's anger over what had happened. And also they spoke about liberation. Well, liberation too late in many ways for so many. And the war exercise was continuing. It was extraordinary. I remember there was even something written on the gates as you went into Bergen-Belsen that talked about walking with reverence, respecting the significance of this place, allow there to be peace. And immediately what struck me was there was no peace. And even the ground itself was not at peace. It was vibrating from the thuds of explosions of the bombs that were part of this war exercise. We were there for about an hour. It was very quiet, other than these thuds and rifle fire. And this is what I remember as clearly as if it happened yesterday. As I walked around, and each time I came to a mound with another number on it that represented men, women, and children who died in this horrific place, increasingly I sensed, and I don't use this phrase lightly, I sensed that God was saying something very directly to me, to my heart. And this was the nature of what I felt him saying. Do you see as I see? Do you hear as I hear? Where you walk, there was shed the innocent blood of tens of thousands of men, women, and children. And I hear the call. I hear the call of this innocent blood. Immediately, I was drawn to the story of Cain and Abel in the book of Genesis. Do you remember what God says to Cain? What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. And it was totally overwhelming, this sense that these were not just words, allegorical words, they were absolutely real, that God was saying to Cain, as he was, I think, to me, yes, there is grass on these fields, and yes, it happened decades ago, but I still see the blood that was shed here, and it's still crying out to me. And what happened to that moment was a realization that is actually what judgment is. It's a revealing. It's exposing what is hidden or what we choose to hide. It's making it visible. And that God said to me, I see, and I do not forget. And I'd never understood that sense of God as judge as well as I did at that moment. That to talk in terms of forgiveness, life, hope, resurrection, absolutely yes. But we have to start with God as judge, a God with righteous anger, and a God with a broken heart over what we, his people, we, his children, have done to each other. And in this case, what was done to 6 million men, women, and children. Remember the statistic I spoke last time, 1.5 million children under the age of 15 who were a part of that statistic. I dwell on this story because actually this is what gave birth to the shape of the work Alpha and Omega that followed this experience. Because when I got home, the very first piece I wrote was an attempt at describing in the language of music my visit to Bergen-Belsen. I tried to, this was initially on the piano, and I tried to recreate something of the rumbling of the explosions and the gunfire. I was trying to create, almost this sort of physical atmosphere before moving into the piece. And when I'd finished writing it, there was a kind of relief, really. I felt I'd been able to pour out of my heart what it felt like to be there. And just as importantly, what I felt was going on in my own journey of faith and understanding and rethinking a lot of what I'd grown up with. I'm going to stay with the Kaddish because the second part of the story around this opening piece is not so long after that, namely less than a year, my first ever visit to Jerusalem. By this stage, we knew that there was going to be this special concert centered around this work. And if you remember me saying this was going to be part of a very significant gathering of men and women from all over the world with a prophetic ministry seeking what is God saying to us, particularly his people, what is God saying to the church in these days with all the turbulence around the world. So that was the context in which I was going to perform this work. but I'd never been to Israel. And on my first visit there, I struck up some very, very special friendships that last to this very day. Two of the people that I struck up a friendship with were called Pam and Shmuel. They had lived there for all of their lives, and I was introduced to them through a mutual friend. And they were fascinated with my story and what it was that I was bringing, or was going to bring some months later to Jerusalem. And they asked, is there any music that they could hear? Well, I'd made some demos. I'd done some initial sort of note-taking recording, and I had this opening piece, and I played it to them. They were silent, and then Pam looked at me and said, "You've written a Kaddish." And I had no idea what she was talking about. It sounded like a dish, Indian dish or something. And I said, "I'm sorry, what is a Kaddish?" And she said, "It's a Jewish prayer. And it's a very special prayer because it's the prayer that is prayed after the death of somebody. It's a prayer of committal. It's a prayer that acknowledges that God is the creator of life and the taker of life, and that we start with God as creator and we return to him as creator after our earthly death." Something extraordinarily powerful about this prayer. And I just looked at her and I said, "Yes, that's exactly what I've written here. Thank you so much, because you've given me a real key to what this work is going to be about, and the fact that it's going to need to be in chapters, and we're going to have to start with this sense of God's broken heart over his broken world, his anger at what we have done, and the judgment that will come because God does not forget." So I'm going to leave it there. I know it's a bit heavy, but I think you'll understand why that was so important. It's so important to sort of tell the story of Kaddish for Bergen-Belsen, and then we'll pick up from that point next time. Thank you so much for watching.